Hey, ni hao students, it's Mr. Howard and
Mr. Gibbons.
we're here in episode 3 to give you a summary and overview of the dynasties of Imperial China. To start out with, we want to talk about the sources we used. Mr. Gibbons, why don't you start with the sources you used?
So the sources that I looked into to gather my information was Khan Academy. They have a huge collection of both videos and text resources about all different subjects. So I used the Imperial China Dynasty modules that they have available for free online. Also used the TCI textbook Ancient World and Beyond Chapter 16.
I used the China A New History as a reference for the dynasties we've been learning about, and also a high school world history textbook called World History Connections to Today. We're going to start with just a simple overview. Remember, we have learned about the dynastic cycle and the mandate of heaven, and that's one of the patterns we're looking at as we're looking at the rise, the accomplishments of fall of one dynasty to another, that pattern of having strong leaders starting an empire, then over time, because of problems, internal conflict, external conflict, but really coming down to a lack of leadership, the dynasty falls. And in Imperial China, that's connected to this belief of the mandate of heaven, that the emperor had been given the blessings of their gods to rule, and then over time, that family, that dynasty lost it. Imperial China spans from about 200 BC, actually maybe a little bit before it, but we're starting at 200 BCE, and it ends all the way back about 100 years ago in the 20th century CE.
The first dynasty that we're going to be talking about is the Han Dynasty. They reigned from 206 BCE to 220 BCE. Now this is considered the golden age of Imperial China. This is the first time really things are going well. They've collected all this territory. It's now officially the Chinese. They call it China at this point based off of the first dynasty that the Han defeated, which connects to the rise of the Han Dynasty. So we talked about the Qin. Remember, that was the dynasty that came right after Confucius's time. They tried to wipe out Confucian ideas when we read through his story. Eventually, a guy named Lu Bang is going to gather loyal troops, going to gather some military tacticians, and they are able to conquer the weak Qin dynasty. Now, under the Han Dynasty, they have some accomplishments, one being the Silk Road gains support, and they are able to kind of trade with the West and gain some wealth that way. Also, what falls under this Golden Age classification is the use of civil service exams, finally putting into effect Confucius's ideas of meritocracy and getting the educated to be involved in the government. Scholar officials, those are educated people that are helping in the government. They invent paper, they invent stirrups, which makes them more successful militarily. They've got wheelbarrows, suspension bridges, pumps, seismographs, all these different technologies that are being used to make them more successful, able to benefit their empire. Now, eventually, 220 CE, so about 400 years after their rise, they are going to fall. Corruption starts to hit. Relatives, servants of the emperor are given jobs over more capable people. Taxes are raised to pay for these public projects. A lot of people are used on these public projects, which isn't such a good thing for the people involved. Eventually, bandits and warlord groups are going to rise, the farmers are going to rebel, and the Han Dynasty loses its mandate of heaven.
Now, throughout Imperial Chinese history, there are going to be these gaps, these moments where a dynasty does not control all of China. And we're not talking about all of China like if you look at China on a map. It's usually settled around the rivers to the north and would spread north and south from there. We see that in that almost 300 years later, more than 300 years later, the Sui dynasty is established in 589. So here's one of those gaps where you have many different kingdoms, their warlords, individual families, individual kings ruling parts of China, all thinking they're in charge. The Sui dynasty was able to rise and reestablished dynastic control of China. This is in 589. Yang Jian usurped the throne of one of these families. He was able to gather a large army and navy and unite all of China. This dynasty wasn't along very long. It was pretty much a father and son, but they accomplished a couple things that would hold out for more than 1,000 years, all the way up to the fall, with the very last dynasty we're going to be talking about, the Qing dynasty. What they did, they reunified China. They began building the Grand Canal, which connected rivers to the northern parts of China and southern parts of China. Most of the major rivers go east and west, and so the Grand Canal was this north-south water route. I'm having enunciation problems. They worked on the Great Wall of China, and here's, I think, one of the most important things. They revised the legal code that pretty much was consistent through the rest of Imperial China. They reestablished the use of the civil service exam that the Han Chinese had developed centuries before. Now, as I said, they weren't around very long. It was a father-son duo. The emperor was far too ambitious, overextended the resources of his government. They tried to invade what is present-day Korea and lost. They had to put heavy tax burdens on the population. They needed labor and money for all these different projects. Eventually, combined with a failed military campaigns, people rebelled, which leads us to the next dynasty.
And that dynasty is the Tang dynasty. They're actually going to pick up right where the Sui left off in 618 CE. A guy by the name of General Li Yuan is going to take power. He was a general, like I said, so he's able to get that military support and take over. He was a successful general and took his power while the Sui are collapsing. He has experience in these fights, in these battles, so he's able to use that experience to take over. Now, some accomplishments under the Tang dynasty, they start having some cultural advances, something called foot binding, which is no longer around very much, but it's something that they started to implement and became popular under the Tang dynasty.
Now, just a footnote, no pun intended.
Hey.
Oh, but you probably don't want to Google pictures of foot binding.
Yeah, there's a reason that it's very frowned upon now.
Yeah, you can't see it, but it's an air quote accomplishment. It really isn't an accomplishment.
No. The civil service exam put back into effect, but unfortunately, aristocrats still favored. If you've got the money to get the education, to get the preparation for the civil service exam, that's going to favor you. Those poor children of poor farmers aren't going to be able to afford the materials required to prepare quite as well for that exam. This dynasty is considered the height of cosmopolitan culture. That means the height of kind of cities, height of interaction and culture. During this time period, Chang'an, is that how you pronounce that?
That sounds good.
The Tang capital is the most populous city in the entire world at this time. So you can tell they've got some serious growth going on. Also, some great advances in medicine and engineering. Now, eventually, in 907 CE, the Tang dynasty is going to fall. Common thread here, the peasants are rebelling, there's battles between generals, their empire is too large to effectively govern. Couple that along with some serious natural disasters. They had enormous flooding. They had a disastrous harvest the year after those enormous floods. So things are not going well, and thus the Tang dynasty lost the mandate of heaven.
So we have about 50 years or so when we pick up with the next dynasty, the Song dynasty. So we have this little gap where there was some chaos, everybody's trying to take over, jockeying for position, and this leads to the next dynasty, which is the Song dynasty that goes from 960 all the way to 1279 CE. It rose. We have Taizu of Song usurping the throne. He spent 16 years reuniting and conquering China, and he established a strong central government. There were a multitude of achievements during the Song dynasty, some technology, some culture. They developed movable type, which allowed for easier mass production of books. They developed gunpowder during this time. Originally, it was supposed to be a medicine, but it quickly began being seen as other uses. Fireworks were invented during this period. Neo-Confucianism, which is new Confucianism, developed. It's based on Confucius philosophies and would influence government and society. They developed the compass. which this was the first compass to be able to identify, discern where true north was. They revised the civil service exams, made them more open to those people outside the aristocracy. The textbook talks about how they set up schools, they provide tuition assistance, they provided books for those people that are not from the aristocracy, that wealthy landowning class. The textbook also implies that this was kind of universal and this was this amazing change, and it definitely was. But looking at some of the other resources that we've been using to learn and research, it's pretty clear that it wasn't this remarkable change where suddenly anybody could be in the civil service, could be in the government. It went from, I don't know, I think one of the resources I said it went from about 20% being non-aristocrats to about 40%-ish, and to be candid, I'm kind of making up those numbers, but you don't know that. Anyway, how did they fall? Now, this is the exception. Every other dynasty we've been looking at falls apart because of this dynastic cycle where you have poor leadership, poor choices, the government gets overextended, and all these different generals or people start arguing and the dynasty collapses. The Song dynasty is kind of an exception. They had been experiencing external invasions. It started with the Jin, who had conquered and established their own dynasty. The Jin were, I believe they were from northeastern China, present day. Later on, during the Qing dynasty, it'd be the same place where the Manchus came from. Anyway, they conquered northern China, pushed the Song dynasty into the south. The capital was moved to the south. And then the Mongols come and they finish them off, which leads us to the next dynasty, Mr. Gibbons.
The Yuan dynasty. So we're picking back up in 1279 CE. The Mongols come in. We're actually going to cover the Mongols on their own in a separate podcast, so be on the lookout for that. But they're going to come in and take over and insert their own government within China. A guy named Ogedai Khan destroys the weakened Jin dynasty in the north, and then they continue the conquering into South China, where they are going to defeat the Song. Kublai Khan is going to take on the role of kind of manager, emperor, Khan of China.
Yeah, he became the emperor.
He became the emperor, calls himself the emperor. But he still faces unrest. You can imagine all these Chinese are not happy being ruled by these Mongol invaders. So Kublai Khan is going to rely heavily on Chinese advisors, but he's still a little suspicious. He wants to put in his own people that he can trust into his government. And that's where we get this government by foreigners type. There are a few accomplishments under the Mongols, not a whole lot of progress because there's so much, trying to control just takes up a lot of time, a lot of energy. They're going to have some cultural diffusion. The Mongols, one of the largest empires ever. I think it was the largest empire.
Largest contiguous
empire. So they're going to bring in all those cultures from the West, from Africa, from Europe, from Northern Asia. So they're going to spread that all out. They're also going to take Chinese ideas and spread those into their other parts of their empire as well. They're going to move their capital into what is now the Chinese capital of Beijing. So that's kind of a big deal, wouldn't you say?
I'd say that's a big deal.
Because of the Mongols, that's why Beijing is so important to China. They're going to emphasize the military. So up to this point, the military is not a huge deal for the Chinese. They're more focused on governing. We have a few empires that try to expand, try to use their military might, but it's at this point where the Mongols are really going to say military is important. We need to make this a major focus. Eventually, the Mongols are going to fall around 1368 CE, so just under 100 years, the Yuan dynasty is going to exist in China, and that's a result of those management problems. They're going to have a shortage of administrators. They got rid of the civil service exam. They thought it was silly. They didn't like Confucius's ideas. Like I said as well, the Mongols didn't trust the Chinese, so they relied on their own people, which unfortunately with the language barrier and with a lack of experience in dealing with Chinese, they were not able to properly govern. They also had fighting within the government. They had Chinese rebels in the south, as well as some natural disasters such as drought, floods, and famines, which is just does not make it easy to govern.
So, Mr. Given said 1368, the Mongols fell, and here's another one of those moments where we transition right to another dynasty. This is the establishment of the Ming dynasty. So this guy, his name's Chu Yanzhang, was a farmer. He ended up becoming a rebel and a warlord, led a resistance against the Mongols, and over time he was able to unite all of China again under his banner, under his leadership, and would gain the mandate of heaven. He went through the rituals. We talked about that on, I think, our second podcast about the dynastic cycle. And he would become the Hongwu Emperor and establish this new dynasty, the Ming dynasty. He freed China, as I said, from Mongol rule and united them under a single government. They accomplished some things. They started really early on under the Hongwu Emperor. We have Zheng He was a explorer. He was actually a Muslim in the court of the emperor, and he was sent out as an admiral, leading a fleet of ships on diplomatic efforts throughout other parts of Asia. He went over to South Asia, to India, all the way over to Africa, and he brought back to the imperial court things like giraffes and things like that. Many historians look at this and go, well, he was exploring. He really wasn't. It was more a focus on diplomacy and kind of spreading Chinese influence over a part of the world. This didn't last really long, and this is one of the reasons, one of the causes to the downfall of the Ming, but we'll get to that in a moment. They made the Great Wall stronger. They were afraid of the Mongols. The Mongols were not down and out. They were still lingering around up in the north and the northwest, and so they extended the Great Wall. They reinforced it. If you ever get a chance to Google the Great Wall, you'll probably get some wonderful pictures of several of the restored areas. There's this place called Badaling where you see the Great Wall having these large stones and these towers and battlements and all that. That's Ming Dynasty Great Wall, okay? Before that, it would have been stamped earth and timber in a lot of places. It became more elaborate. How did it fall? Well, after the Hongwu Emperor, they kind of became paranoid, kind of locked themselves in. They closed their borders, became really focused on inside of China and ignoring the outside world. The government had a difficulty adapting to changes. They looked down on science, engineering, math, and trade, all the things that would help you advance technologically. Because of how they managed taxes, or lack of tax collection, they weren't able to maintain infrastructure like roads, the Grand Canal, the Great Wall. They were just an ineffective and inadequate bureaucracy for what it was at the time, it still is now, one of the largest populated empires on the face of the earth. I think here they had like 80 million people. So, combined with their inability to fend off invaders, it leads to the next dynasty,
which is the Qing dynasty. So the Qing dynasty are going to be established in 1636, and they're going to last right up until, what's this, 1912?
1912.
1912.
Yeah, 1912.
So this is going to take us right up until what's called modern China, or modern day China. So they're going to rise, like Mr. Howard mentioned earlier, from this northwest part of what is today China. A guy by the name of, I don't know, can you pronounce his name?
Isen Garo
clan. He's going to organize what are called banners of military support. So up in the north of China, he's recognizing, hey, if we gather together, we're going to have some strength. Now, up to this point, Han Chinese, that's the main ethnicity of the majority of China, even today. But this group from the north and the west are considered Manchu Chinese. So again, we've got this different ethnic group of, what's really a minority going to take power over the majority of the people in China. Now, they're supported by Ming defectors who are resisting these rebels. They're also supported by the Mongols who are still around in China. So not only are they able to gather their own support, even though they're a minority of the ethnic group, they're able to get this support from these rebels and from the Mongols and are able to move into Ming territory and conquer it in 1644. Under the Qing dynasty, they're going to open China back up. They're going to really put some more power, some more trade, some more kind of organization into the Silk Road. They're also going to popularize what's called a guild hall. So it's where different merchants would meet, they'd trade things. the market towns where people would just come just for the market, just for what the town has to offer. Those are going to be on the rise. Poetry and publishing grows. Literacy rates go up under the Qing dynasty. So there is some culture growth under this dynasty. But eventually, the Qing dynasty, like all dynasties before it, is going to fall. One of the reasons is mass civil disorder. Like I mentioned, this is a small minority that is ruling over the majority. So a lot of Chinese are not happy about that. There's also this kind of, debate over the suspicious death of the empress. There's a belief that she was poisoned, and actually years later they're going to do some scientific analysis, and they find that she did get poisoned. The next in line was actually a 2-year-old. So obviously he can't rule. So his father is the one that takes over in his place. He's going to make some changes, which makes a lot of people upset, and is going to lead to a new government being formed in the creation of the Republic of China.
And at Mr. Gibbons, as we learned when we were learning about imperialism, we also had like the British and the Germans and the French. They were all showing up trying to change things. The Qing dynasty had difficulty dealing with these other countries. And like the Ming dynasty, they did not emphasize in their government the skills that you'd need to deal with international relations and science, technology, those developments. So that leads us to the end. We went from the beginning to the end of Imperial China.